It is week 16 of fantasy football. Awaken from your bye weeks. If you had a great team, you are on to the next round. If you played in week 15, this is the second most important matchup you're going to play all year. Week 16 fantasy football. We got 16 games to cover, so we're going to get right into things, starting with Thursday night football. The Broncos traveling to Los Angeles to face the Chargers. Chargers are 2.5-point home favorites, implied for just over 20 points there. The game environment not expected to be a good one. You had the Chargers being the number one scoring defense in the NFL before last week. Now, since the Bucs wiped the floor with them, the Broncos now being the number one scoring defense in the NFL. So we got two defensive teams that probably want to play a low-scoring game here. Not the best game environment to kick things off in Week 16. I'm sure if you guys do have players in this game, you're hoping that Vegas is wrong here. Some of the key matchups to pay attention to: Bo Nix, Justin Herbert, both below-average matchups, keeping with the theme here that this could be low-scoring. Both running backs, below-average matchups for Gus Edwards / Kamani Vidal, Javonte Williams / Jaleel McLaughlin. I wouldn't mess with really any of those running backs if you don't have to. Cortland Sutton versus the Los Angeles Chargers secondary. He is one player that you probably would be starting, and he has a above-average matchup, although they have been a little bit better against number one receivers as opposed to receivers in general, so keep that in mind. Patrick Surtain is expected to shadow cover Quentin Johnston in this game, which means Ladd McConkey has the better matchup on the field. According to Rotoballer's slot matchups, he has a top 5 matchup there. So Ladd McConkey and Cortland Sutton, really the only guys that you need to start in this game. And even Sutton, I would say, if you have a lot of great options, doesn't necessarily need to be in your lineup. But McConkey appears to be the best start in the Thursday slate. So moving into the 2 Saturday games that we have. So the split that we have this week is 2 Saturday games. We have 7 1 p.m. games. Then we have 4 p.m. games, 1 Sunday night, 1 Monday night. We will be doing our tier list a day early this week. So just a programming note, running back tier list will be on Friday, wide receiver tier list Friday afternoon, to make sure that you guys have everything you need before those Saturday kickoffs come. First of which is Texans at Chiefs. Chiefs are 3.5-point home favorites in this one, 22.5 implied points. Again, not another good game environment here, 41.5-point over-under. The under catching some of the steam. The pace of play is among the lowest on the slate, and the DVOA matchups are both in the negatives because both of these teams, despite their great quarterbacks, or at least in theory great quarterbacks because they haven't played great this year, their teams are built on defense, basically. That's what we're looking at with these two matchups. So it does appear that Mahomes is going to be okay. He was fully practicing earlier on in the week, and hopefully he will be good to go even despite the high ankle sprain. It might limit him mobility-wise, but he should be ready to play in this one. Both quarterbacks have below-average matchups, so not a great situation for either guy, Stroud and Mahomes. If you don't have good options, I suppose you could play them. If you have better options, you probably should bench them. Both running backs, Isaiah Pacheco and Joe Mixon, have bottom 5 matchups, but are probably still in your lineup given the volume that they get, especially with Mixon, assuming he's 100% healthy with that ankle issue that he suffered last week. Xavier Worthy and DeAndre Hopkins do have good matchups versus the Houston secondary, and those guys probably have the best matchups of anybody in this game because Nico and Tank Dell do not have good matchups. Bottom 13 defense there, or top 13 defense against fantasy wide receivers for those guys, but of course Nico is probably still in your lineup. Tank Dell maybe not so much. Travis Kelce, 11th best defense are the Houston Texans, so not a good matchup for him. And then Dalton Schultz, if you guys are looking for a streaming tight end, we'll see what happens with Cade Stover, who had appendicitis last week, and that was why Dalton Schultz played like 91% of the snaps. If Schultz is going to be that much of a workhorse tight end again, I do think you could actually stream him in this matchup, knowing that the wide receivers for Houston don't have the greatest matchups, and he does have a pretty good matchup. We could see Dalton Schultz have a pretty good game in this one. The second Saturday game that we have here, we have the Steelers at Ravens. The Ravens 6.5-point home favorites. The Steelers, of course, won the first matchup between these two teams when it was in Pittsburgh, a gritty like 18-16 game, AFC North style ball there, but the Ravens got a nice little point advantage here, 26 implied points versus 19.5 for Pittsburgh. The over-under of this game, 45.5 points, the under catching some of the steam. The pace of play is about league average, but Baltimore's DVOA advantage versus Steelers defense is a pretty sizable one. So I kind of like Baltimore to maybe cover this spread here. Key matchups to pay attention to: we have Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman versus the Pittsburgh defense. The passing game not really set up for a great matchup. All those receivers plus Lamar Jackson, the Steelers have been pretty solid against them. And as we saw in the last time that these guys played, it was Lamar Jackson's worst game of the year. On the flip side, we do have have Russell Wilson and George Pickens in a good matchup, but we do still have George Pickens working off to the side, dealing with that hamstring injury in practice. So it is to be determined if he ends up playing in this game. If he doesn't, then of course Pat Freiermuth is going to see a bump. If he does, and just in general, we don't want to be starting any other Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers, and probably not Russell Wilson in this matchup as well. Rashad Bateman versus Joey Porter Jr. is expected to be a shadow matchup. So best ball mania purposes, Rashad Bateman was a huge advance rate guy. Last week, he had a monster 2-touchdown game, and he might be stymied in this one going up against Joey Porter, and maybe we see a little bit of a correction go Zay Flowers' way there. Both running backs have below average matchups as well. Derrick Henry was kind of shut down last time they played against these guys, and it appears Najee Harris is going to have a difficult matchup as well. So, as I mentioned, 7 1 p.m. games on Sunday afternoon. And let's get it kicked off with Giants at Falcons, a pretty ho-hum game environment. 8.5-point favorites are the Atlanta Falcons. This will be Michael Penix's debut. For those of you guys who are unaware, Kirk Cousins was officially benched by the Atlanta Falcons after I saw a split here in his non-Tampa Bay Buccaneers games, because obviously he shredded us twice. I think he has like a 10 to 15 touchdown interception ratio. So he's been pretty bad outside of 2 games against Tampa Bay this year. Over under of 42 points, under catching a lot of the steam here. It does not appear that the Vegas, overlords are putting much respect on Michael Penix, or especially Tim Boyle, who is expected to start for the Giants, at least at this current point in time. The pace of play is expected to be pretty high in this game, so good news for some of the pass catchers and some of the fantasy options in this game. We might get a lot of offensive plays. Tim Boyle and Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson do have a really easy matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Malik Neighbors is expected to see A.J. Terrell in shadow coverage. That shouldn't be too much of a problem. We saw Mike Evans have a big game against A.J. Terrell. We've seen a number of guys go off against A.J. Terrell. I believe that he's allowing like 16 fantasy points per game to opposing number 1 receivers, so I wouldn't be too worried for Malik Neighbors. Tyrone Tracy, a little bit of a tougher matchup, but Atlanta's defense is beatable just in general through the passing game and through the running game at times. Bijan Robinson, a great matchup and a great game script for him, as is the case for Tyler Algier. If they do, it wouldn't shock me if the Falcons just won this game easily and Bijan gets 25 carries and Algier gets 13 carries or whatever, and they just run it down the Giants' throat, get out of there with a win, and stay alive in the division race. But who knows? Maybe Michael Penix, Darnell Mooney, and Drake London get it done through the air. Kyle Pitts, a brutal matchup, probably sit him. And then if you're looking for defensive streamers, Atlanta is definitely near the top of the list, given the fact that they're going up against the Giants, and Younghoe Koo, a great kicker option this week. So Cardinals at Panthers, a little bit more of an interesting game because the Cardinals are still in the thick of a playoff race for the NFC West. They are 4.5-point road favorites in this one, going to Carolina, who kind of laid an egg last week despite having a number of good games where they brought good teams down to the wire. Didn't really show up in the game against the Cowboys. Bryce kind of played his worst game since his benching. Arizona implied for 25.75 points. The over-under in this game is actually quite high at 47, and Arizona's DVOA matchup third best on the entire slate. So Arizona's pass-catching options might actually have a pretty good spot here. We got Kyler with the 29th easiest matchup. You got James Conner with the 32nd easiest matchup for him, and then even Marvin Harrison, J.C. Horn, also one of these guys that does shadow cover just like A.J. Terrell, but hasn't really been that effective in shadow coverage. He gets targeted at a very high rate. Mike Evans obviously has had a good game against him. A bunch of other guys have gone off against J.C. Horn, so I wouldn't be too concerned with Marvin Harrison's matchup. He should be in your lineup. Adam Thielen, Jalen Coker versus the Arizona defense. They've actually been surprisingly very good against opposing wide receivers, so that is a little bit of a downgrade for them. Bryce Young could struggle in this game as well. Chuba Hubbard, a pretty decent matchup on the ground. If Carolina wants to move the ball in this game, it's going to probably need to be with a strong running attack, and Hubbard had a bit of a stinker last week. Hopefully he can make up for it. A lot of you guys who had Hubbard probably had like bye weeks because he was such a great pick this year. So hopefully he gets back on track in this one. And then, of course, Trey McBride is in your lineup. He's my tight end 2 on the week. He has the 31st easiest defense, and if you are looking for a fantasy defense to play here, Arizona is a decent one because Bryce Young definitely prone to turning the football over and making some negative plays happen. Lions at Bears. This one is extremely important for me because one of my best, or if not my best ball mania team remaining has Jahmyr Gibbs on it, which I'm one of 16 teams in my pod with Jahmyr Gibbs, which feels really good knowing that David Montgomery is out now for the rest of the season. I also have Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Cole Kmet on that team. So I need this game to shoot out in a big way. Lions are 6.5-point road favorites, implied for 27.25 points. The over-under is the second highest on the slate at 48. The over catching a big chunk of the steam, so that makes me feel very good. And then Detroit's DVOA, a top 5 matchup for them. And given how many injuries they've suffered now on defense, they just lost Carlton Davis and Aleem McNeil in the last game there. They're down, I think there was a tweet said that like 60-70% of their starters and direct backups are now out on IR right now. So the Lions defense, and now without David Montgomery on the offense, they might need to be passing the ball quite a bit more because Jahmyr Gibbs excels as a pass catcher. They might be actually allowing a lot of points. So I feel pretty good about this game to shoot out, and specifically Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Keenan Allen to actually be able to get things done through the air. I know Caleb Williams had a very ugly performance on Monday night, but it was a much better Vikings defense versus the one that you're going up against here with Detroit. Even when healthy, they were an exploitable defense through the air. Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, not an easy matchup versus Chicago, but again, if they're down in this game or if they have to throw because the defense is allowing a lot of points, I wouldn't be shocked if St. Brown catches 11, 12 passes in this one. J-Mo makes a big play and everything's hunky-dory. Jahmyr Gibbs, my RB1 on the week, of course, without David Montgomery, this was always within the range of outcomes for Jahmyr Gibbs, is that he could be the best running back in fantasy without David Montgomery there, because if you get a 70% snap share, opportunity share on this team, even if Craig Reynolds, Sione Vaki are mixed in, you're going to be absolutely dominant, especially against the 29th ranked run defense in the NFL. DeAndre Swift, tough matchup for him, but he did actually perform last week in a tough matchup versus Minnesota. And then Sam Laporta, a very good start as well, because of all the players that benefit from the David Montgomery injury and the fact that they might throw more, to me, Sam Laporta is the one that benefits the most. So he is a must-start tight end for me this week. And Cole Kmet, not a good matchup, but a good game environment, so you could throw him out there if you were desperate. Bengals at Browns, the next game that we have here, 7.5 home favorites, or road favorites, for the Cincinnati Bengals going to Cleveland, who have had their number a little bit, but I feel pretty good that Cincinnati knows this is a must-win game. They got to put up points. Over under a 47. Right now, we do not have Jameis Winston putting up points on the other side of the ball. They have moved over to Dorian Thompson-Robinson to play quarterback for Cleveland. The pace of play is top 4 on the slate, and Cincinnati's DVOA is a pretty good advantage there as well. Key matchups to pay attention to in this game, you got the Browns passing game, DTR, Judy, Tillman, Elijah Moore, going up against the 26th ranked Cincinnati Bengals defense for quarterbacks and wide receivers. So DTR hurts the offense, hurts Jerry Jeudy, hurts Cedric Tillman. If you guys have these players, I'm sure you were hoping that Jameis would stay at quarterback because they've been throwing the ball like crazy. Jameis, of course, while he's going to turn the ball over, is also going to make big plays here and there. So kind of downgrades Jerry Jeudy a little bit, but he is still in your lineup most likely given the matchup. Joe Burrow versus the Cleveland pass defense. Not a good matchup, but Joe Burrow is matchup proof because he's that good. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins conversely do have a good matchup. So awesome matchup there for the receivers. I think they'll be able to get a lot of damage done. We do have our first game here now of Jerome Ford being the starting running back because Nick Chubb is out for the year. He broke his foot. So Jerome Ford, a pretty good matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. And then Chase Brown, not a good matchup, but I think the offense should be moving itself very strongly. So I wouldn't be too worried about the efficiency bump or efficiency downtick that we might see for Chase Brown. And if you're looking for streaming tight ends, I mean, Njoku's not a streamer when he's healthy, but given the hamstring issue he's dealing with, maybe downgrade him to streamer territory. 30th easiest defense, though. And then also Cincinnati's defense definitely in play with Dorian Thompson-Robinson playing quarterback. Moving on to the Titans at Colts here. The Colts are 3.5-point home favorites. Pretty gross game environment, just a 42.5-point over-under. The under catching this team. Pace of play is very solid. Both of these teams run pretty up-tempo, especially Indianapolis. But the DVOA matchups for both teams are well into the negatives and bottom 10 on the slate. So we might see this game hitting the under and not producing a lot of fantasy points. Mason Rudolph is slated to start at quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. Will Levis has been benched. So that's probably good news for Calvin Ridley. I mean, Calvin Ridley performed better when Mason Rudolph was the quarterback. He got the targets. He got peppered with those PPR points. So I think if you have Calvin Ridley, you should feel pretty comfortable starting him. Anthony Richardson versus the Tennessee Titans. I mean, it's week 16, man. This is the fantasy playoffs. I cannot, in good faith, tell you guys to start Anthony Richardson with how up and down he plays. So if you got the balls for it, go ahead, but I'm probably not going to be doing that. Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, especially because they don't have good matchups, that downgrades the whole passing offense as a whole unit. And then both running backs do have above average matchups, though. So Jonathan Taylor and Tony Pollard set up pretty well in this game, assuming Tony Pollard is healthy, of course. He's got that ankle issue that he re-aggravated Last week, maybe we see Tajay Spears get the bulk of the carries. I'll cover that in the tier list tomorrow. Stream the Colts defense as well. If you guys are looking for a defense, Mason Rudolph, definitely an exploitable quarterback. Probably would have been better if Levis was starting for the Colts defense, but still pretty solid nonetheless. Rams at Jets. The Rams are 3-point road favorites versus New York, even though New York has been playing a lot better as of late. Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams obviously had a monster game. I like this one to be high scoring, as does Vegas. 46.5-point over-under, catching the third most steam of any game on the slate. And the pace of play is also tied for second highest on the slate as well. And the Rams' offensive DVOA matchup versus the Jets' defensive DVOA matchup is pretty solid advantage there. And even the Jets' DVOA is about league average on the slate. So this is a matchup where all the fantasy players are great. I mean, you guys are starting Kyron Williams, you're starting Puka Nacua, you're starting Cooper Kupp despite the donut that he posted last week, and you're starting the Jets' Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams. Even both of these quarterbacks, I know they're not every week starters, but given the matchup that we have, both of them have top 12 matchups. I do think you could play Stafford or you could play Aaron Rodgers. I prefer Stafford, given his team is implied for more points. Both running backs do have bottom 12 matchups, so with Breece Hall still banged up and Kyron Williams having a tough matchup, you got to downgrade those guys a little bit. But like I said, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, and Garrett Wilson in good spots here, particularly the Jets receivers against the Rams secondary. And then if you're looking for kicker matchups this week, I do think both of these kickers are in play, given the game environment, the scoring atmosphere, so on and so forth. So NFC East showdown here. We got the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Washington Commanders. This would presumably lock up the division for Philadelphia if they haven't already done so. And this is a crucial matchup for Washington to keep their playoff hopes alive. They are currently holding the 7 seed. The Eagles are 3.5-point road favorites across the board. This is about a league average matchup in terms of the over-under of 45.5, the over catching the steam, so on and so forth. But the key matchups to pay attention to that you really, really want to dial in here is that Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin are dangerous starts this week. I do still think you have to play them given what they've done for you this year. Jaden Daniels being a top 10 quarterback, Terry McLaurin being a top 20 receiver. You're probably still playing these guys, but maybe try and make up that upside in other areas of your lineup because they might have a down week given how good Philadelphia's secondary and Philadelphia's defense has been this year in general. Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, those guys are in your lineup. Washington's about a league average pass defense across the board. And then Saquon Barkley versus Washington's run defense is also a pretty good matchup there. I believe this was the game, too, where Saquon went absolutely berserk against Washington, or was that against the Rams? I can't even remember. But Saquon, shout out to him. He is probably going to be a huge, huge piece of Best Ball Mania advancing teams this week because I do think the Eagles could put it on the Commanders this one. Brian Robinson, tough matchup for him. Again, downgrade him, but he's probably still in your lineup. And then if you're looking for kickers, I think these guys, both of them, are good options as well, given the over-under, but particularly Jake Elliott, even though he hasn't been that great this year, given the implied total for Philadelphia. So moving into the 4 p.m. slate, we got one 4:05 game here and then a couple 4:25 kickoff on the Eastern time zone. Vikings at Seahawks. The Vikings are 3-point road favorites here. This one is really, really crucial for NFC playoff seeding because the Seahawks are trying to stay in the race for the NFC West, and then the Vikings are trying to catch the Lions and the Eagles as well for that, NFC North lead and also potentially the bye week as well. So this one's going to be really crucial. I do think that the Seahawks are a good value bet here because they're at home, and the Seahawks at home are a vastly different team than they are on the road. So the fact that you're getting 3 points plus the home field advantage, I actually kind of like Seattle if you guys were betting this game. Over-under of 43.5, over catching 10% of the steam. Pace of play is pretty solid. The key matchups to pay attention to, you have both quarterbacks, probably not in the greatest spots. Sam Darnold a little bit more so than Geno Smith. I think he's a better play. But Geno Smith, given that he's hurt, even if he plays at all, I'm not excited about starting him. Justin Jefferson, Addison versus the Seahawks cornerbacks. That is a slightly above average matchup for those guys. So that's why I kind of feel good about starting Sam Darnold, even despite the tough matchup for him. Kenneth Walker, if he plays, and we don't know that yet. He hasn't practiced so far this week. Zach Charbonnet also missed Wednesday's practice with an oblique injury. They have a tough matchup on the ground. For me in the Flock League, I really need Walker to be out because I need Charbonnet to be the lead back here. And also on one of my other teams, I kind of need that as well. Aaron Jones, a very good matchup for him there. The Seahawks have been exploitable on the ground, as we saw on Sunday night versus the Green Bay Packers. Josh Jacobs kind of did whatever he wanted. DK Metcalf is expected to see shadow coverage from Stephon Gilmore, who was out last week, but if he is active, keep that in mind. DK Metcalf will see shadow coverage from him. And then conversely, JSN actually has a really good matchup because the Vikings are really bad against wide receivers, but Gilmore's been their like lone bright spot in the secondary. So if he is occupied with DK Metcalf, that could mean an 11 catch game for JSN. Like we could definitely see that. And also, I don't have it listed here, but TJ Hawkinson, very similar matchup, a little bit better actually than Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison's matchup. So I feel pretty good about the Vikings passing game in this one. Feel pretty good about JSN, like I said. Moving on to an AFC East showdown of Patriots at Bills. We have the Bills 14-point home favorites, so 2 touchdown favorites here against the division rival. The Bills, awesome last 2 weeks, obviously 40-plus points scored against the Rams and the Lions, respectively. 46.5-point over-under there implied for 30 of those, and then the over catching a good amount of the steam. The DVOA matchup, not even close. First versus 32nd. That's as wide of a gap as you can possibly get, so you feel pretty good about Buffalo covering that spread if you guys are betting that. Josh Allen, great matchup for him against the Patriots defense. Drake May, not so much. If you wanted to cope and say that Drake May is a decent quarterback streamer because of the game script, that's fine. I probably wouldn't risk it given how bad the Patriots have been on offense. Amari Cooper is expected to see shadow coverage from Christian Gonzalez whenever he's on the field because he's not even really a full-time player. Both running backs have top 6 matchups. So, I mean, James Cook, you are, of course, going to be firing out there, but I do think Ramondre Stevenson is a great play this week with the 31st ranked Buffalo Bills run defense. I do think if the Patriots can keep this one close enough, at least keep it close within the spread, you could see Ramondre Stevenson have a good game here. And then both slot receivers have pretty decent matchups as well. Shakir, 19th for slot receivers. Pop Douglas, the only receiver worth a damn on the Patriots, 30th. Against slot receivers are the Bills, so if you needed a desperation flex play, I think he's not a bad option. Dalton Kincaid, 25th ranked matchup for him, and then Buffalo defense, if you need one, definitely a good one, knowing that they're 2 touchdown home favorites. Always a good process play there. Jaguars at Raiders, this one's probably NFL draft implications and nothing else, so I can kind of skim through it. Lowest over-under on the slate. Pace of play is about league average, the under catching a lot of the steam. I can't imagine anybody starting either of these quarterbacks, and outside really of Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, and Brian Thomas Jr., I don't think anybody's excited to start anybody other than those guys because, I mean, ETN, yeah, he's getting some work, but Tank Bigsby's still there. So again, start him as a top 30 to 36 running back. He does have a good matchup. The running backs for the Raiders, you're probably not excited about now that Sincere McCormick is out for the year. You're going to be going back to the Alexander Madison, Amir Abdullah situation, which is never a fun time for anybody. But Brian Thomas Jr., tough matchup against the Las Vegas secondary, although they are banged up right now. Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, pretty good matchup or very good matchup versus the Jacksonville defense. And then if you're looking for a streaming tight end, Bretton Strange did have 12 targets last week without Evan Ingram, so he's a half-decent option. And if you're looking for a defense, the Raiders are technically favored by 1 point at home in this game, but I actually prefer the Jacksonville defense against Las Vegas. I think they just stack up as the better team because Desmond Ridder is just absolutely awful. So we'll see how that game plays out. Again, that's more draft implications than anything. But 49ers at Dolphins, next game that we have up here. Miami 1.5-point favorites, over catching a lot of steam in this one, but just a 44.5-point over-under. This one's pretty cut and dry. I feel like everybody knows who to start from these two teams. Both quarterbacks in play, but bottom 6 passing matchups for Brock Purdy, for Tua Tagovailoa. So not must-start options, but top 15-ish quarterbacks if you need them. Both running backs have bottom 6 matchups, so I imagine you are starting Devon Achane, but temper expectations for him. And Isaac Guerrero, I imagine you're probably starting him as well, but temper expectations for him. Both wide receiver cores have brutal matchups. So again, I mean, Tyreek, when he's healthy, you always play him. Jalen Waddle is banged up right now, so you're going to have to follow his health status closely. If he is out, Malik Washington, not somebody I would mess with in this game, but Tyreek Hill sees an upgrade in that situation. Juwan Jennings, he's going to have a tough shadow matchup versus Jalen Ramsey, so keep that in mind. Not a great situation for him. Deebo Samuel has been fucking awful as of late, but if you needed to play him, I suppose you could in this game. Just not a good, like the amount of juice that 49ers Dolphins should have had at this point in the season is not what's actually present here. So, I mean, really disappointing that this game doesn't end up being a lot more fun. Had these two teams played last year in Week 16, for example, this would have been fireworks, 55-point over-under type of game. George Kittle and Jonnu Smith definitely starting tight ends there. I have both of those guys in my top 8. Danny and I have a little battle of FSE on Sunday Night Football. Buccaneers at Cowboys. The Buccaneers 4-point road favorites here, which I don't really feel great about, knowing that I'm a Bucs fan. It feels like when everyone starts to buy into us, we have a primetime game coming up, and then we shit the bed on primetime, and that's why we never get any national respect. We just dominate in the 1 and 4 p.m. windows silently, and then when we get on primetime, we completely shit the bed. So I'm a little worried that we might drop this game because we kind of won a game that we maybe shouldn't have last week with the Chargers going on the road. I kind of chalked that one up as an L earlier on in the year, but we ended up winning it. So it could be a little bit of an overcorrection here that we end up losing to the Cowboys at home. But over under a 48.5 points, that's the highest on the slate. So this one's going to be a very good fantasy bonanza here. Both quarterbacks have top 6 matchups. Baker Mayfield, the top 5 quarterback in my rankings this week. Bucky Irving, Rashad White, great options this week. Rico Dowdle, also a very good option, although his defensive matchup is a lot worse than those two guys. Mike Evans is in your lineup. Of course, he had a monster game. He's on his quest for 1,000 yards this season. He needs, I think, about 80 yards per game to end up getting there. Jalen McMillan is actually a pretty good streamer. He's getting the routes. He's getting the usage. He's playing a lot better. He could be a very good flex option for you if you needed one. And then CeeDee Lamb, of course, is in your lineup every single week. Stream Jake Ferguson. He has a pretty good matchup as well. And then if you need another tight end, Cade Otton as well. Both of those guys are in my top 12 to 15, I believe, at the tight end position. So you could stream either of them. So great Sunday night matchup, at least from a fantasy perspective, into a snooze fest of a Monday night matchup, which is the New Orleans Saints and Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener. I don't even know who's starting at this point. Probably Spencer Rattler going up against the Green Bay Packers on the road. 14-point, 2-touchdown favorites for Green Bay. Honestly, I don't think that's enough. I think Green Bay should be favored by even more than this. Over-under is 42.5 points, kind of ho-hum there. Over actually catching some of the steam, which is wild to me that that's the case, but they are catching a little bit of the steam there, so maybe they're just thinking that Green Bay is going to wipe the floor with New Orleans. Regardless, you have Jordan Love, Jaden Reed, and Romeo Doubs against the Saints defense. That's the 21st easiest matchup there against that pass defense, so I feel pretty good about all those guys. You have the Saints quarterbacks and wide receivers. I mean, you're not starting any of these guys, but they have a terrible matchup anyways. Josh Jacobs, great matchup on the ground. I'm sure he is going to win a lot of people their matchup this week. If you go into your Sunday night game or after your Sunday night game and you're down 15 points or 20 points and you still have Jacobs to go, I would feel pretty confident that he's going to get you that because he's been on a tear as of late, and this is a really easy matchup for him. Alvin Kamara, don't know his health status yet, but if he is active, he's got a pretty league average matchup. If he's out, Kendre Miller's probably going to take over the lead back job there for the time being, and he's got a league average matchup as well. And then both tight ends, I think, are in play, but definitely Tucker Kraft. I have him inside my top 12, and the Packers defense, a very good streaming option as well. So speaking of streamers, we're just going to scam through the quarterbacks, tight ends, defenses, and kickers because nobody has bye weeks anymore, so you probably don't need streaming quarterbacks, tight ends, kickers, and defenses. But if you guys are still looking for them here, we got Sam Darnold, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, and Caleb Williams. All come with their own, host of decent situations here. You got Darnold in a good game environment, good high-scoring game environment. Stafford and Rodgers playing each other. Like I said, I like that game to shoot out. And then Caleb Williams against a decimated Lions defense. All of those guys very solid. Tucker Kraft, Freiermuth, Kincaid, and Schultz all getting good usage. All of them have little matchup upgrades here. You have Tucker Kraft against the Saints, very good matchup. Dalton Kincaid in his matchup against the Patriots is good. Schultz, like I talked about, the Texans receivers don't have good matchups, but he has a good matchup. And then Freiermuth maybe without George Pickens yet again, so he is a good streaming tight end. And then if you guys are looking for streaming kickers here, we got Tyler Bass, 2-touchdown home favorites. Feel good about that. Chris Boswell had a monster game last time they played the Ravens, so I like him again this week. And then Will Reichert of the Vikings, a good matchup there for Seattle. Streaming defenses, these are my top 5 defenses on the week. So if these defenses are available, they are high priority options. Packers versus Rattler, 2-touchdown home favorites. Falcons versus Tim Boyle, it's Tim Boyle. Bengals versus DTR, I mean, need I say more there? Bills versus Drake May, again, 2-touchdown home favorites for the Buffalo Bills. And then Colts versus Mason Rudolph, it's Mason Rudolph. So those are my streaming defenses. Those are my streaming kickers. At the last part of this video, as we always do, I'm going to go over my Thursday Night Football Pick'em slate. Again, I don't love this Thursday night matchup because we do have 2 defensive-oriented teams. But if you guys are looking for a Pick'em here, we got Ladd McConkey, higher than 5.5 receptions. Quentin Johnston, shadow coverage versus Surtain on the outside, which is why I went with the lower in his fantasy points. And Ladd McConkey versus the slot receiver or the slot cornerback there. We feel pretty good about that. So I like Ladd McConkey to go higher, Quentin Johnston to go lower. And then I like Cortland Sutton to go lower than his first downs. He's been below this total or at this total in 10 of 14 games this season, plus down game last week against the Indianapolis Colts. Generally a pretty good defense this year have been the Chargers. They are also on the road, Denver. So I like Courtland Sutton to go lower than those first downs. Because, I mean, if you have 4 first downs, you basically have to catch like 6 or 7 passes most of the time. Or all of your passes have to be for like big chunk plays. So I don't really feel too great about Sutton hitting that, which is why I like the lower. Again, if you guys want to tail those picks, you know what to do. Head on over to the link down below in the pinned comment. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up over on Underdog Fantasy for up to $1,000 in bonus cash to this Justin Herbert free square to add into this entry to make it a 10x if it ends up hitting. You can 10x your original entry. And then, of course, you also do get our weekly start sit rankings manifesto for free for the last 2 weeks of the season to help you in your fantasy playoff matchups when you sign up using that promo code FSE. So the link down below for that. If you guys want to tail these entries, tons more pickems. All you have to do is hit higher or lower on your favorite players for Thursday Night Football, for the NBA, for the NHL, whatever sport you guys are into. Head on over to Underdog. Definitely check that out and make sure Underdog knows that we sent you by using that promo code FSE when you sign up. Link down below in the pinned comment. So good luck for your matchups in Week 16. Hope you get to a good start in Week 16 on Thursday Night Football and in the Saturday games. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.